This is Michael Smook for episode 19. We post on YouTube, Facebook, and Vimeo. The topic of today's conversation is it okay if we talk about politics and religion? Today is October 5th. It's a Friday, and we're in the year 2017. I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills, New York. Forest Hills is in Queens County. Queens County is an outer borough of the city of New York. The topic today, is it okay to talk politics and religion, stems from my wife and I went to synagogue on the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it has to do with this talk today. The rabbi gave a sermon on topics that might be considered political. And we attended synagogue with friends who voted for, they belong to a different political party than I do and my wife. And they voted for President Donald Trump, and they like him. And I thought it was remarkable because after the rabbi gave his sermon on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we had conversations that were civil, they were informational, they were meaningful, and they were fun. And I think it's really nice that people are able to talk about these things and have really good conversations. And I thought the whole thing was rather remarkable. That's why I feel compelled to have a conversation with you today. Before we get started, let me outline what this talk is going to be about. We're in chapter 1 now, which is the introduction. Chapter 2, I'm going to be answering the question, what does it mean to be Jewish? And I'll answer why we're going to talk about this definition. And then chapter 3, we're going to talk about, the title is called Republicans Have Feelings Too. And there'll be 2 short stories in this chapter 3, and one is entitled The Dinner Party, and the next story is Testing the Waters. And then chapter 4 will be talking about the rabbi's sermons on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And then we'll summarize, and the title of that chapter, chapter 5, and the summary is, why are football players taking a knee during the national anthem? And now that I've summarized what this talk is about, is it okay to talk about politics and religion? Episode number 19. Let's move forward together. Chapter 2, what does it mean to be Jewish? The reason why I'm having this chapter and I'm discussing this with you and defining what it means to be Jewish stems from the fact that in a couple of chapters we're going to be talking about the rabbi's sermon, and this information that I'm providing you now will be helpful in explaining that. This all came about 2 years ago. I'm having a cup of coffee, and in the coffee room or the break room, a young lady comes to me. She grew up, or she was born in the subcontinent India and came to the United States, became an American citizen, and she's attending graduate student for a master's in public health. And she asked me an interesting question, a question that no one had ever asked me before. She said, what does it mean to be Jewish? I don't know what her religion was, but that was an interesting question. Seconds before I responded, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say, but remarkably and in a positive way, I was able to speak succinctly and clearly and define what it meant to be Jewish. Before I spoke, I had a loose leaf paper and a pen, and as I'm explaining myself, I'm writing this out on a piece of paper. And I said, well, first, and I used a Yiddish word, first being Jewish means, the one word that's important is rachmanis, which means empathy, and I wrote that out. And then I said, to be Jewish is to believe in tzedakah and mitzvot, which is charity and good deeds. I wrote that out as well. And the last words are also Hebrew words, tikkun olam, heal the world. And I wrote that out as well, heal the world. And then I summed it up and I said to be Jewish is to care about other people, to believe in helping the less fortunate with charity, and performing good deeds, and to try to heal the world. Judaism is concerned with social justice. That's what that all adds up to. And I also believe that the system we have in the United States, our economy, the free market capitalist system, overlaps with social justice. In fact, I spoke about this in previous YouTube talks, where I spoke about the need for to strengthen the middle class and expand it to include low-income folks. And that's a secular sort of way of tying into the four words that I just spoke about. So now that I've explained, and the thing about this is that I don't know if the young lady who I explained what it meant to be Jewish still remembers this conversation, but I remember this conversation very well, and it's helped direct me and guide me, and I'm using it today in this YouTube talk with you. So it was a good conversation, and I'm glad I remember it. Now let's move on to Chapter 3. Republicans have feelings too. That's TOO. You know, the thing about it is I'm a Democrat, and I speak to a lot of Democrats, and people are very upset that Hillary Clinton lost the election. And when you look at Washington, it's dominated the executive branch, the president, Congress, the Supreme Court. It's dominated by Republicans. When you look at throughout the 50 states in the United States, most of the governorships are Republican. Most of the state legislatures are dominated by Republicans. And so the Republicans seem to be getting elected. Perhaps you can make the case that the Democrats are the problem of the party. They may not get elected, but they're party of ideas. So anyway, Republicans are also concerned. And Republicans I know who voted for Donald Trump, and some Democrats voted for Trump as well. But anyway, Trump voters are also upset as well, and I could feel that. And I wanted to tell you with that and share that with you and give you two examples. In early August, I had dinner with a longtime friend, and he told me about this story. He's a Trump voter, and he also voted for Ronald Reagan. And in the middle of these presidencies, he voted for Democrats. And the reason why he voted for Trump and he voted for Reagan is he's an avid Wall Street investor, and my friend feels that his hard-earned dollars will grow faster in these situations with Republicans in the White House. So this friend of mine goes to a dinner party, and he meets with, I don't know how many people at the dinner party, but the host of the dinner party, a longtime friend of his, starts criticizing him for voting for Donald Trump in the last election. And words were exchanged, and it was very hurtful to my friend. And the way I hear it is there's sort of a breach or a fissure in the friendship, and I'm not certain whether that friendship's going to get healed. So the thing about it is when you exchange words and you're talking about politics, especially on a weekend where people are used to relaxing and talking about anything but politics, and then you're questioning somebody's judgment, a mature adult, words can be hurtful and harmful. Relationships are fragile and they need to be cherished and nurtured. So I could feel that what my friend might be dealing with. And to borrow a phrase from Bill Clinton, and I mean this sincerely, not sarcastically. I mean it sincerely as I feel his pain, I understand his pain, and I feel bad that this happened. Another example about how I realized that Republicans have feelings too. About 2 months after the election, maybe it was after the inauguration, my wife and I go out to dinner to a diner, and a couple who we know, they're Trump voters. The husband comes up to me and he smiles and he says, "You don't like him." And I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He's a Mets fan, I'm a Yankee fan. Maybe he was talking about the managers of the teams. So I had no idea what he was talking about. Then I realized, we just had inauguration the other day. So he's talking about Donald Trump. So what I said to him was, before I said anything, I rephrased the question in my mind, and then I answered it in a way that was consistent with my philosophy and with my temperament. And so I said to him, I looked at him straight in the eye, and I said, "Look, there are a lot of Republicans I like. I don't have to like all of them. And there are policies that the Republicans are in favor of, especially related to the economy, that I embrace, and I support them as well. So, so the thing is, that was my answer to my friend, and my friend needed further assurance, and he said, "Well, what do you think of Sean Hannity?" Sean Hannity's a TV star. He's on Fox News. He has very strong conservative Republican opinions. He's not everybody's cup of tea. He's not mine, but I really don't want to talk about that. All I simply said was, in a lawyer-like fashion, I said, "You've already asked that question, asked and answered." And then I emphasized, I said, "Look, if you want to drill down to the nitty gritty, I'll talk to you about Republicans who I dearly, truly, and deeply admire. And I could talk about policies that Republicans and Democrats could both embrace. For example, trade agreements. North American Free Trade Agreement. As many Republicans voted for that while Bill Clinton was president as Democrats." Anyway, he didn't want to hear that. And actually, what I just told you, I didn't actually say in that conversation, but I was ready to say it. My friend just really wanted to be assured. Look, I live in New York. This is what he was probably thinking. Look, I live in New York. People hate Trump. If I talk about it, you'll probably hate me. And by me assuring him that it was what I was really, by responding to his questions, I was really assuring him, saying, I respect I may not agree with your choice, but I respect your choice, and I'll fight to ensure that you have that choice. And I respect you that much, and our friendship is too much. And in addition, I believe in the American system. And that's what I tried to convey to my friend. That's what I could really feel was going on. And that's why I decided to call this Chapter 3, Republicans Have Feelings Too. So I understand that. And just let me embellish on this and say it one more time. Words have a power unto themselves, and relationships are fragile. And I try to treat relationships like fine china, because they can easily crack and damage. And once the damage is caused, it's hard to repair it again. So that's why Chapter 3 seemed like a good idea for this talk. Now let's talk about Chapter 4, which is the rabbi's sermon. The rabbi for Rosh Hashanah, he spoke about the Middle East peace and a two-state solution between Israel and Palestinian Arabs. And then for Yom Kippur, I sometimes refer to it Yom Kippur, but it's the same way. It's okay to pronounce it either way. Anyway, the point is, the rabbi gives a speech, and he says, "You may not feel better after you hear this speech, but I will." And then he proceeded to run through best case scenarios of what could happen if Donald Trump is our president. And it was a short list. And then a longer list was a worst case scenario of things could happen if Donald Trump goes ahead with his plans in his administration. And the rabbi spoke longer. He provided more examples, and he spoke with a certain level. It resonated with the rabbi and a certain level of embellishment. So after both of these sermons, friends of mine in the audience who had previously voted for Donald Trump, who still support and like him, which is fine that they still support and like him, but they came up to me and they said, while we were listening and watching the rabbi's sermon, we were closely listening and watching you. And we could see from your body language, your facial expressions, your vocal mannerisms, saying aha and okay, and we could tell that you're supportive of the rabbi, and we question, if you're partisan or not. And and we said this over a bite to eat when we were outside of synagogue after these services. So as we're celebrating Rosh Hashanah, when in responding to these are same comments after both speeches, and after we went out to eat for Rosh Hashanah, I said, look, the politics between Israel and the Palestinians, I can't solve. It requires politicians, diplomats, and statesmen to resolve. That's above my pay grade. but I do have specific ideas about the economics of the Middle East, and I tend to feel that once Israel and the Palestinians are able to work things out, I think that Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, Jordan, Morocco, and 6 other Gulf states, maybe the new Palestinian state if there is one, they will join together and provide a free trade agreement, and there'll be enhanced trade between these countries, and it'll be similar to the European Union. They'll call it the Middle East Union. And also, I think Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Israel will form a Middle East bank, and with that bank, they'll rebuild Syria and they'll rebuild the Gaza Strip. Because at that time, Hamas in the Gaza Strip will be at peace with Israel as well. And I could go on and on, but for the time being, I said to my friends, that's about the economics. But if you want to have more discussions about that, we can. And I offered to talk more about it at that time, and they just needed assurance that that I was who I seemed to be, a bipartisan, a Democrat who's bipartisan, who's open to talking to Republicans. Now, for the Yom Kippur speech, what happened was, in response to the similar kind of comments and the questioning whether I was truly partisan, and in a way I am, but I'm also bipartisan. And I said to them, look, I've been going to Yom Kippur services since I was 5 years old. I've never heard a rabbi giving a sermon talk about politics. And instead, it sounded and felt like he was critical of Donald Trump. And the thing is, if the rabbi asked me what I thought, or the rabbi asked me to give a presentation for a Yom Kippur speech, I would have spoken about the Jewish values of Rachmanis, empathy, tzedakah, and mitzvot, which are charity and good deeds, and I would have spoken about Tikkun Olam, heal the world. And what this all equals to is social justice. But I also believe in the American free market capitalist system, which overlaps with economic justice, and I would have spoken about that as well. Because in the past, in previous YouTube talks, I've spoken to you about the need for to strengthen the middle class and expand it to reach out to low-income people. Because even though in many ways I'm secular, I still remember I'm a Jew, and I still care about other people. I care about my son and my future grandchildren, but I also care about other Jews, and I also care about other people who aren't Jewish, and I believe in the United States, and I'm a loyal, patriotic American. So that's what I explained to my friend about how I would have done it differently, and I thought the rabbi could have handled it differently. I didn't necessarily disagree with his speech, but this is Yom Kippur. It's a solemn day. It's a time of renewal. It's a time of reaching out to friends and relatives who've departed, and it's a solemn occasion and a time of reflection. And it's not a time to talk about politics. So by talking about social justice and sometimes leading into economic justice, that's a way of talking about the same subject without naming political figures or using the word politics, which sometimes has negative connotations. So if the rabbi wanted to expand even further, he could have said, to ensure social justice, private sector could do it, government could do it, or maybe there's a middle path, a nonprofit environment could do it. And then we could get down to even more specifics. How much money should we spend? What programs should there be? And how do we do this? It's all about logistics and planning. So that was the kind of conversation we had about Yom Kippur. And so I would say these conversations are really good. I don't mind if a friend who supports Trump comes up to me and says, it feels initially like somebody's playing a game of gotcha, but I don't mind because the answers that I give I'm being true to myself, and it aligns with my politics, and it aligns with my temperament. And so that's why we're doing the YouTube talk today. And those are some of the things we spoke about, chapter 4, about the rabbi's sermon. And I thought it was these remarkable conversations, and I wanted to do a talk because of that. Now let's go to the concluding chapter, and let's talk about the title, Why Do Football Players Take a Knee During the National Anthem? It all starts something like this. We're out for a cup of coffee, and a friend of ours, she's a Trump's voter and supporter, and she said a compound question. She said, "Is it going to get better? There's so much divisiveness in the country. Why are football players taking a knee before the national anthem? And what do you think of what President Trump said?" 3 questions immediately, all within 15 to 20 seconds, and she asked me, can you give me some sort of feedback? Because, this is really bothering me. So I said, yes, it's going to get better. I said, 2, let me address Donald Trump's comments. And it all kind of relates to a book that I read in 1999, 2000. Joe Torre, and it's a Joe Torre, George Steinbrenner story. I went to Borders Books. Borders no longer exists, at the World Trade Center, and Joe autographed the book, and I spoke to him briefly. I came home, read the book, and actually he autographed it, and to Mavis, my wife. And I read the book, and the one thing I remember from the whole book was Joe had managed 3 clubs before he came to the Yankees, and then when he came to the Yankees, he won. He was manager of 4 World Series champions in 5 years, and that was his entrance ramp into the Hall of Fame as a manager. And George Steinbrenner was a little bit like the president. He was a tough guy. He's a tough guy to work for. And what Joe Torre said in how he, as a manager, he would manage his boss, he would say, sometimes George would say things to get a reaction from him. And Joe said something very simple that helps me, and it would help me if I had conversations with the president and how I react to things that he says. I said, don't let other people's negatives push your negatives. So when the president says things that I disagree with, it's best that I underreact, take a deep breath, smile, and move on. So that was my response to my friend. I said, I try not to let other people's negatives push my negatives. Now, she asked me, what about football players taking a knee before the national anthem? National anthem is an important song, and that's disrespectful. I said, well, from what I've read and seen about players, they're either interlocking arms, some are taking a knee during the national anthem. I don't know why football players are doing that, but not hockey players, basketball players, or baseball players. But look, it's really helpful being 62 years old. I remember during the Vietnam War, 50 and 45 years ago, during the Johnson and Nixon administrations. In those days, young people were in danger of losing their college deferments and getting drafted and going to Vietnam, a war they didn't believe in. Young people had long hair, whiskers on their face, at least the men did, and they played loud rock and roll. Some smoked pot, and to show their disapproval of Johnson and later Nixon with the draft, they sometimes would temporarily occupy buildings and shut down campuses, and they'd burn their draft card. And Johnson and later Nixon supporters would respond to that kind of behavior and say, well, America, love it or leave it. And I think that the conversation would have been enhanced and the volume lowered if Johnson and Nixon supporters said, instead of America, love it and leave it, they would say, America, stay and improve it. So it sort of relates to now. Well, let's go back to the Vietnam War for just a second. Things going to get better for the Vietnam War. Let me give you an example. It's a terrible war. Millions of people died, not just 60,000 U.S. servicemen, which is a terrible loss. What happened as a result of the war? Today, 1 million Vietnamese people live in the United States, and from what I've read, they're doing well. which is an American success story. Also, Vietnam has reconstituted itself. It's one country after war against the Japanese, the French, the United States, and it was a Vietnam Civil War, and that's over with. The country has reconstituted itself, and they have very good trade relations with the United States. They, in fact, want even closer trade relations with the United States, and in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I hope President Trump walks back and embraces. And that was previously discussed in another YouTube talk. And, the thing is interesting. The Chinese sometimes will set up oil rigs inside Vietnam's territorial waters, and the Vietnamese are quite happy when the U.S. 7th Fleet comes by. And we warn the Chinese in advance. The Chinese pull out the oil rigs, and they're glad, the Vietnamese, that the United States is sending its Navy ships through, and they're getting a little respect from Big Brother, China, the Middle Kingdom. So that's an example about how things have gotten better. And 50 years ago, we never would have imagined these things happening today. So that's why it's helpful to understand history, and it's helpful for me to read the New York Times. I read it Monday to Friday in the mornings and in the evenings. The phone is updated throughout the day, so I have a virtual newspaper. So understanding history, understanding the present, gives me hope. It has a calming effect on me. So that example that I've just provided you, well, the thing is, while I'm speaking to my friend who's concerned about disrespect from players, putting a knee down, not instead of standing up at attention during the national anthem, the whole explanation about how things have gotten better with Vietnam, I just simply said, well, it's going to get better. What I just told you, the story, I didn't actually given the explanation to my friend, but this is additional story that I would have told if it had called for it, if she really was eager to learn more. But anyway, so the thing is that the Vietnam War, it didn't end the way we wanted to, and if the United States could have, we would have rather have saved the South Vietnam. But the fact is, some good things have happened after the war, and I'm able to look upon. It was a very hard and difficult time in U.S. history, and things are pretty good for a number of reasons I've just outlined. Now, what's happening today? Some players are standing at attention during the national anthem. Some put their hand over their heart and sing the song. Other players, they also are respectful. They don't make a spectacle of themselves. They're on one knee, and that's symbolic of dissatisfaction of some things that are going on in this country. Other players, they'll just stay in the tunnel. They won't even go out onto the field. So I think we need to have the same attitude with people who are taking a knee during halftime at football games. We need to engage in conversations. Maybe after the first or second time, we won't understand each other, or maybe we'll agree to disagree, or maybe we'll come into a better dialogue and an ongoing dialogue. But we need to be patient. We need to listen respectfully. We need to understand that words can be harmful. We understand that relations are fragile. And we need to engage with people who have some concerns about what's going on in the United States. I would presume that the people who are taking a knee during the national anthem prior to a football game, whether they're black, white, red, yellow, brown, that they're patriotic Americans. They pay taxes, they vote, they say pledge allegiance to the flag when it's called for. And I'm not questioning their loyalty as American citizens. I think what it's about is, during the Obama administration, there was disharmony in cities and in suburbs. For example, Ferguson, Ohio, in Baltimore, things like that. It had to do with police and residents' interactions and people getting killed. And also, my approach is more of an economic approach, which is why I understand there are a lot of middle-class people, and there are a lot of middle-class people that are hurting. They're living paycheck to paycheck, and they don't feel middle-class anymore. A lot of low-income people they're never going to be becoming middle class. Look, we've had 8 years of prosperity since the near depression. Um, Between Obama and Trump, the country has come back, but the growth has been slow. So I understand there are a lot of people who are hurting, and I've presented to you ideas about what we can do to reinvigorate the economy. So when I give these proposals, I'm well aware of concepts of social justice and economic justice. Of course, some of the things that I'm talking about now, I'm going into detail that I also didn't explain to my friend. But just to summarize, I said, yes, it's going to get better. Two, when the president says things, I try not to let his negatives push my negatives. And three, and I also said, summarized, the people who are taking a knee at halftime are loyal, patriotic Americans. And so I'm glad that we had this talk today. Let me just say that the reason why we're having this conversation, the catalyst was the rabbi's sermons during the high holidays, and the conversations with friends who were voted for Trump and liked the president. They were civil, they were informational, they were meaningful, and they were fun. I'm glad we had these conversations, and so I'm glad I had an opportunity to talk to you today. So let me just say a few things before we say goodbye. This is episode number 19. The topic of today's conversation is it okay if we talk about politics and religion? Today is October 5th. It's a Friday. We're in the year 2017. I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills, New York. Forest Hills is in Queens County, which is an outer borough of the city of New York. So until next time, it's been a pleasure. Goodbye and good luck.